Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Hi, welcome back. I am your host, Koku. Tonight we should have an interesting discussion. We're revisiting the school to prison pipeline by reading this paper about building, staffing, and insulating an architecture of criminological complicity in the school to prison pipeline. I want to thank you guys for joining me tonight. I want to also remind you that I'm not the only show on KWAZ radio. We also have others. Take a listen.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. In addition to those shows, we have a few other shows coming in the new year. And we also have the Queen's Council podcast you guys should tune into as well. So, today's show, building, staffing, and insulating an architecture of criminological complicity in the school to prison pipeline. This paper was written by Judah Schept, sounds like a Judah, Tyler Wall and Avi, sounds like a Judah, Brisman. It starts off with this quote, and I posted this quote on social media recently, and I said I addressed it as, listen, think about it. And this quote says, a man working in a munitions factory explains that he is not killing, he's just trying to get out a product. The same goes to a man who creates bombs in that factory. He's just packaging a product. He's not trying to kill anyone. So it goes until we come to the pilot who flies the plane that drops the bomb. Killing anyone? Certainly not. He's just pushing a button. Lastly, there is a Vietnamese peasant, dead, but not killed, you might say. The consequence is there, but born of a process so fragmented as not to register in the consciousness of those involved in it. Charles Payne, quoted in Smith, 2009. Peace to the pro-Black perspective in the chat room. It says, peace families is only inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions. Yes, indeed. Make sure that you guys tune in to Oni. I think he has a show set for tomorrow night at 8 p.m. So make sure, check him out. Yeah, so, that quote is an interesting quote. Now, do you think that quote leads to, these white folks denying or playing dumb about their involvement, their complicity in the school to prison pipeline? Do you think that quote is a setup to playing dumb, right, of white folks playing dumb to the prison, to their part in the school to prison pipeline. If you think so, for you guys live, give me a thumbs up or a check mark or something, or press 1 in the chat. Press 1 in the chat. That's easy enough, right? So let's begin. The concept of the school to prison pipeline, also known as just the pipeline, has drawn important attention to the linkages between education, police power, and incarceration. Academic scholarship, grassroots and national activism, critical and mainstream journalism, and a wide range of policy work have identified key areas that have produced and continue to sustain the pipeline, a fundamental feature of the prison industrial complex. These include the implementation of zero-tolerance measures for disciplinary infractions on school grounds, the growing presence of police in schools, and the concomitant criminalization and juridification of school discipline. Such measures and policies arose in part as a response to the infamous and racialized prediction by criminologists James Q. Wilson and John J. DeLulio Jr. about the rise of the youth super predator, which they envisioned would hit the streets of the United States in the mid-90s. The youth super predator never arrived, but the policies substantiating and perpetuating the pipeline remain. Moreover, the direct complicity of two of the most notorious late 20th century right-wing scholars belies the larger epistemic, ideological, and practical ways in which the disciplines of criminology and criminal justice structure the pipeline. Indeed, criminology has offered alibis and bodies for the capitalistic state to securitize schools and criminalize youth. It is the purpose of this article, then, to begin to sketch these structural complicities. Specifically, we examine the role of the University Criminology Criminal Justice Department in creating, staffing, and legitimating the pipeline. This article offers a preliminary and provisional conceptual scaffold for understanding the complicity of the criminology or criminal justice discipline and its academic departments. In addition, this article argues that when criminology does call criminal attention to the pipeline, its gaze remains decidedly reformist. We contend that scholars must commit to the abolitionist project of dismantling the pipeline and redistributing the state resources that sustain it. Future articles will flesh out the ideas offered here, and we hope our colleagues will take up the project of holding the discipline accountable. We believe we are uniquely positioned to offer this reflexive analysis of the disciplines complicitly in the carceral continuum. As associate professors in the School of Justice Studies at Eastern Kentucky University, previously the Department of Criminal Justice and Social Studies, and Police Studies, we are housed in a school and larger college, the College of Justice and Safety, that exists in a somewhat bizarre tension. All three authors and many of our colleagues identify as committed leftists who are critical of the conservative and liberal reformist initiatives in criminal justice for years have been involved to varying degrees in a wide range of social movements and political causes. Meanwhile, our livelihoods as teachers depend upon educating students seeking positions in the very systems with their related practices and knowledge bases that we actively struggle to upend. We first review some of the literature demarcating the school-based trends that perpetuate the timeline. These works demonstrate the various factors that have propelled so many youth out of schools and into jail and prison cells. Yet we contend that the role of higher education in the pipeline remains underdeveloped. Finally, the article sketches the critical role of the criminology, criminal justice discipline, and its academic departments in staffing, sustaining, and continuing to legitimate the continuum. This brings us to the part of the paper called Conceptualizing the Pipeline, Prior Research. Let me just dip my head in quickly to see if anyone responded in the chat room. To the question that I asked. In the chat room, we have Sister Renee is back again with us. Peace to Sister Renee. She says, this sounds similar to racism without racists. Racism is everywhere, but no one is a racist. We identified that last time as the deception in warfare, right? There's this racism all about, in all aspects of society, right? But yet no one's racist, right? As that quote sets up, like there's this idea that you play your part in this case, the racism within the education system, creating the school to prison pipeline that supports the prison industrial complex, right? But for some reason, you as the teachers and the superintendents, the deans of the schools, etc., no one's a racist. But we'll see what this paper decides to try present to us by the end. Scholars, activists, and journalists have consistently identified how students are funneled from classrooms to courtrooms and cages. These mechanisms are school-specific and constitute threads of much larger projects of neoliberal capitalism, police power and security, and the growth of the prison industrial complex, otherwise known as PIC. As various commentators have demonstrated, punitive sentencing and policing policy in the 70s and 80s, including federal and state mandatory minimum sentencing laws like the 3 strikes and your outlaws and broken windows policing, led to the dramatic rise in the prison population and christened the United States as the world leader in incarceration in sheer numbers and per capita rates. These policies and practices channeled urban bodies of color into rural prisons, thereby creating a justification for prison growth in rural America, and were reflected in worked and conjugation with get tough approaches in schools. Indeed, as the Advancement Project in 2010 has noted, school districts have adapted these criminal justice approaches in spirit and specific practices. Specifically, scholars of the pipeline frequently identify its origins in the adaptation of zero-tolerance policies and rhetoric with respect to disciplinary infractions on school grounds that originated in Reagan-era approaches to the war on drugs. In the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s, federal legislation was passed that targeted drugs, gangs, and guns in schools and eradicated strict accountability measures for failing students in schools. However, measures such as the Drug-Free Schools and Committees Act in 1989, the Drug-Free Schools Act in 1994, and the No Child Left Behind Act in 2001 frequently distributed racialized punishment in public schools across the country. This included preventative detention measures that amounted to profiling. an overrepresentation of African American children in special education programs for behavioral reasons. Ample documentation exists of the racialized nature of these practices. Yet some suggest that such policies and practices are so commonplace and accepted that they now appear in white, suburban, middle-class schools as well. Simon, in 2007, notes that these changes occurred as part of a larger shift to govern through crime. Following the Safe Schools Act in 1994, for example, public schools had to demonstrate several key items to qualify for federal funds, including close cooperation between the school and the police and juvenile justice agencies, to say nothing of internal punitive disciplinary measures that schools had to implement pursuant to this legislation. The No Child Left Behind Act of 2001 extended zero-tolerance policies beyond disciplinary infractions into the realm of actual educational performance. Indeed, the construction of an at-risk and criminalized population is sutured to the narrow epistemology that promotes accountability through standardized testing via the neoliberal capital logics of accountability and individual responsibility. Due to pressure from the No Child Left Behind Act, schools inevitably push out problem students who distract others or whose scores would drive down a given school's aggregate scores. Once a child drops out, he or she is 8 times more likely to be incarcerated than youth who finish high school. No surprise. Perhaps the greatest indicator of the success of zero tolerance in helping to construct the pipeline is the increasing prevalence of police in schools, often referred to as a school resource officer. How many of you had these school resource officers in school when you were coming up? In the Caribbean, we didn't have police officers in school like that. It wasn't, in public schools, it wasn't uncommon for police to show up. But we didn't have a police station in the school in my time. How many of you had these police officers, these school resource officers, these SROs positioned in your schools, and how would that make you feel? In this article, we closely examine the SRO using the position as a heuristic device for our larger commentary on the pipeline. Hirschfield, in 2008, has noted that school policing is the fastest segment of growth in law enforcement. The New York City Police Department's School Safety Division is larger than the entire police force of several large cities, including Boston, Detroit, the District of Columbia, DC, and Las Vegas. Wow. Wow. See, that's the thing about school. School is such a pivotal moment in a person's life, right? Particularly, not to exclude any section of school, but particularly that primary into middle school, like what y'all call middle school in the States, or junior secondary, like in the Caribbean and stuff like that. That's so pivotal. I talked about in the show before, you lose students at 3 different grades in school. 3rd grade, around 7th grade, and 9th grade. That's when you really lose kids. Either you lose them to the hustlers, the pimps, the gangsters, or the gangs, or you lose them to like R. Kelly or something like that. You know, the predators, you know, stuff like that. That's the time that you lose these kids. So that's where like African-centered curriculum needs to be its strongest in those years or those grades. That's when it needs to be its strongest. So the growth of police in schools and the SROs has led to increasing numbers of arrests and criminal charges. There have not been any significant changes in safety. So for all the cops that you have in these schools now, the school is still unsafe. Make it make sense. Indeed, renowned University of Maryland criminologist Denise C. Gottfredson stated in an article in the New York Times that there is no evidence that placing officers in schools improves safety, and it increases the number of minor behavior problems that are referred to the police, pushing kids into the criminal system. So the way the schools are set up, obviously, right, is that if the miseducation doesn't get you, right, the little minor offenses that you carry out, that will finish you. So they're either going to be successful in miseducating you, right? And in addition to that, they may be successful in criminalizing. In the chat room, Sister Renee says the last 2 years of high school, we had a resource officer. He was a clown. There were no policies in place at the time that gave him any real authority. She goes on to say, that has changed quite a bit since I was in school, though. The Pro-Black Perspective says, they said the police department that paid. They said the police department that paid. I'm not sure what that statement means. All they said was the New York City Police Department Safety Division is larger than the entire police forces of several large cities, including Boston, Detroit, DC, and Las Vegas. So I don't remember seeing anything about who paid or whatever. School shootings, such as the tragic Newton, Connecticut massacre in December 2012, have bolstered right-wing calls for police expansion. The New York Times reported that a National Rifle Association, the NRA, task force proposed armed police for security in every school in the country. South Dakota became the first state to pass a law allowing teachers to be armed in schools and classrooms, in addition to armed security guards, other school employees, and even volunteers. Over 80 similar proposals are in various stages of consideration in state legislatures. Indeed, by the mid-1970s, police patrolled about 1% of schools. By 2008, the figure had jumped to 40%. The Pro-Black Perspective says, yeah, that's crazy how the division is. Yeah, it's absolutely crazy how large the New York City division of police dedicated to schools is larger than all of those other places that I mentioned. That's just insane. The pipeline concept implies a flow between two seemingly distinct institutions, the school and prison, as well as the various appendages of the criminal justice system, to mix metaphors. Sometimes, however, the facade of their distinctiveness crumbles and the coordinated institutions become completely imbricated. Simmons, 2009, examines one such site, a prison school in New Orleans, where the sheriff has created a school for non-delinquent but educationally at-risk youth at the parish prison. Although framed as a preemption of the pipeline, the initiative collapses it. Comprised almost exclusively of African American youth, it is run by the sheriff and housed in a prison. This school clearly signifies a racialized interlocking of the school and the carceral apparatus. Numerous other institutions more closely resemble jails or prisons than the schools they're supposed to be. Every day in one high school and in post-Katrina New Orleans, there are 31 to 40 security guards, 2 to 4 New Orleans Police Office Department officers, and only 21 to 30 educators present at a given time, with class size rarely surpassing 40 to 50 students. The authors go on to note, when students enter John Mack, after standing in long lines to enter the building, they pass through metal detectors staffed by 7 security guards and 1 officer from the New Orleans Police Department. Students are scanned with a handheld metal detector while the contents of their book sacks are searched. Cell phones, oversized jewelry, and belts with certain buckles are confiscated. Students who set off the metal detectors 3 times with no item found are sometimes sent away at the door. On various days, students who are not in their classrooms by 9 a.m. are locked out of their classrooms, while the 31 to 40 security guards on staff perform a sweep. Students rounded up in the sweep are brought to the auditorium and suspended. According to the principal, 52 students were suspended in 1 day for tardiness, which is lateness. I can tell you for a fact, a similar type thing goes on in New York City, in New York City public schools, right? These coercive, increasingly normalized security measures exemplify the pipeline, are often bolstered by criminology as an academic discipline and by the workings of criminology and criminal justice departments. In this sense, the university and criminology are complicit in building, staffing, and insulating the pipeline. We know that academics in a criminology, criminal justice-oriented department, such as ours, help to create the pipeline, provide crucial infrastructure, bodies, and insulate it through justifying knowledge. We now briefly explore the architectural and intellectual conjunctures between the criminal justice department and the state. You know, Sister Renee in the chat room says, I had no idea that prison schools existed. We are the parents. The thing is, most of these measures are sold as safety measures. And so parents will eat it up as, well, I'm sending my kid to school, it's safe. I'm not going to have a Columbine situation. I'm not going to have a Sandy Hook situation because it's safe. We have officers and security and blah, blah, blah. It's safe. But what they're not realizing, right, it's a setup as part of the pipeline to prison systems. So building the pipeline. Deeply structured forces catalyze the criminalization and collection of school-aged youth and usher them toward incarceration. Substantial opposition to this process also exists. Where do the officers in schools, prosecutors, juvenile probation officers, truancy court workers, and other personnel that compromise the shrinking continuum between school and prison originate? How are these functionaries prepared for jobs and careers staffing the pipeline? How does a university degree in criminology or criminal justice legitimate the pipeline? What discourses justify and support the pipeline's existence within the critical academic literature and related journalistic and policy writings. Until now, we believe academic criminology, criminal justice have escaped scrutiny for their roles, and that's an important statement. And it's an important statement not because it's from them, you know. It's important because we don't realize the game being played. The complicity of university criminology and criminal justice departments can be subtle or explicit. Job fairs that feature only representatives of criminal justice agencies and the high number of students who express interest in such careers are a clear indicator. Meaners, in 2011, contends that she has yet to meet the person who is for the school to prison pipeline, or is advocating for an increase in school suspensions, or is conducting research to document why education should not be offered in prisons, or is collecting data to demonstrate that black female youth really are inherently more violent or dangerous than white female youth, or is writing about why we should provide school security guards tasers. So, though few people express approval for the pipeline, as such, many, including our students, argue for increased law enforcement presence in schools and greater use of police power to discipline students. Right? So even some of the students ask for more police presence, which is interesting. This is probably true in other departments of criminology or criminal justice across the United States. But an investigation into complicity should not stop at the level of responses and dispositions. Attitudes critical of the pipeline from faculty and students must contend with a deeply structured, historical, and intimate relationship between our segment of the academy and the armed apparatus of the state. Critically inclined students are no match for discipline with institutional homes that are so heavily committed to and depend on ensuring the pipeline's existence. University criminology and criminal justice departments have their own historical and political economic context. Historically, many of the better-known departments were products of law enforcement's assistance administration, or LEA, funding. Following grotesque exercise of police power during anti-war, say Vietnam, civil rights, and Black Power movements in the 1960s and 70s, the federal government moved to professionalize police forces. This plan also established centers of excellence that were geared toward providing higher education to police. Professionalized higher education, however, has failed to alleviate the racist and classist nature of police power. LEAA, or LEA, and the history of these departments remain relevant for understanding the genesis of and logic behind professionalized training for practitioners in higher education. Even the research, writing, teaching, and activism of scholars in programs such as EKU's School of Justice Studies, which boasts Marxist, feminist, critical race, and postmodern and post-structural viewpoints, cannot erase the school's historical contingency on the original and ongoing material support from the security carceral state. Despite the radical content that they may encounter in their courses, in reality, most students believe in the necessity of the state to the extent that they enroll in our institution to pursue a degree that improves their chances of working for the state. Our own home in a college of justice and safety reflects this history. The college was the brainchild of a director of the Kentucky State Police in the 1960s. and was officially founded as the Department of Law Enforcement in 1965, a decade before massive federal funding flooded universities with startup funds to create or expand criminal justice. So why do you think these funds started to flood these schools for, to create or expand criminal justice programs? And why did it happen, between 65, around 1965? Indeed, when Eastern Kentucky University's newly minted Department of Law Enforcement secured $36,844 from the U.S. Department of Justice's Office of Law Enforcement Assistance, it became the first program in higher education in the country to receive such funding. By today's standards, this is no money. But by, say, 1965, that's a nice piece of change. A lot of homes costed about that amount of money. Homes that are now, $500,000, right? Though LEAA and federal support for university-based law enforcement education departments was not the beginning of higher education's intimacy with police, it did signal a critical point in the complicity of higher education in the school-to-prison pipeline. The neoliberalization of the university further structures this orientation within departments that otherwise might reject it. First, shrinking state investment in education led to a growing, so peep this here, right? First, there was a shrinking state investment in education, which led to a growing reliance on alternative revenue sources for public institutions for higher education. This is one of the things I've talked about a lot and I've mentioned in recent episodes. You have to put money behind your education. If you don't, the apparatus that distributes curriculum, that distributes this knowledge, right, will suffer, right? And when that suffers, the student suffers. And when the student suffers, what do you think happens to the student going forward? In large criminology or criminal justice departments, this can mean soliciting and or receiving larger numbers of already minted law enforcement officers whose tuition they pay. Second, neoliberalism features a weakened welfare state, due in part to the privatization of public services and an emboldened security state. Despite the once popular notion that the state is dwindling due to the natural processes of globalization and privatization, the liberal democratic state, with its security fetish, has brought about its own transformation. Broadly, the rise of the carceral state has steadily shifted state budgetary priorities, including the transfer of tax dollars from schools to prisons. As well-known Justice Policy Institute study, for example, in 2002, found that between 1985 and 2000, spending on corrections across the United States grew at 6 times the rate of spending on higher education. Beyond revealing the social and fiscal priorities of state legislators, such a focus on carceral growth can be interpreted as signifying a labor market investment as well. In tandem with the rise of the federally funded and practitioner-oriented academic department of criminology and criminal justice is the well-documented emergence of criminal justice industrial complex that includes mass incarceration, growing and increasingly authoritarian police forces, and surveillance creep into everyday life. That surveillance creep is big. The connection is not incidental. Indeed, as Foucault in 1980 noted, Criminological discourse is necessary to justify judges judging. That is, neoliberal state-manufactured crisis and the socio-spatial fix in the prison and other formations of the criminal justice industrial complex require a legitimating discourse, which the disciplines of criminology and criminal justice supply. Although criminology is a permeable category, as are all academic disciplines, much of what constitutes a study of fields of criminology and criminal justice is decidedly administrative. This does not reflect some grand conspiracy, since broader changes in governance and political economy structure changes in all institutions, including the university and the prison. In the context of the neoliberal withdrawal of the welfare state, governance and policy operate in and through institutional assemblages of the carceral state and police power, and crucially, through logics and securitized areas of sociality previously unattached to criminal justice. Thus, policy approaches to welfare and education filter through discourses and logics that subject their institutional formations and their everyday activities and carceral influences. Basically, let's just get to the nitty-gritty of it. You know, they defunded education intentionally to fund the prison industrial complex. By doing so, they create an industry, right? We talked about cottage industries in the past. And the industry that they create is an industry centered around criminalizing folks who look like you and I, right? With the expectation that you are black like me, right? And so it's its own, you know, self-powering system. It's its own self-powering system. They're doing all that, you know, they're doing their best to you know, make it seem, you know, like something else, but the reality of it is that's what it is. So like I said at the beginning of the, you know, early in the podcast, you know, they're going to miseducate you to be on the dumb shit, and when you're on the dumb shit, they're going to incarcerate you. They defund the education so you could be even further or even quicker or even more so on the dumb shit so that they could put you through the prison system. While they may do this to poor whites as well, as this paper seems to suggest, right? They don't do it on nearly the same clip that they do it to our folks. So what does that tell you about the education system, right? And College E. Woodson didn't speak much on this, and the reason he didn't speak that much on this is because the prison industrial complex has come up since the civil rights movement. Coincidence? Doubtful. Neoliberal reliance on police and penal power to manage urban and rural crises has effects beyond the individuals and groups targeted directly for imprisonment and the places and spaces identified specifically for locating prisons. That locating prisons is a very important point. Years ago, I used to go visit folks in the prison, like doing like prison ministry type stuff. And, you know, these prisons tend to be located, I think I've talked about this before, but they tend to be located in these little kind of rural towns, mostly white. Everyone eats off the prison. being in town. This is also true of some of these universities. Some of these universities are in areas of the U.S. that you and I wouldn't particularly want to even be in, to be honest. Right? But it feeds the people, right? It's one of those cottage industries that feeds the white folks in that area, right? How many of you in the chat room or otherwise have known someone to be in a prison, like let's say they're from Brooklyn, but they're in some prison in some rural part of Georgia, or they're from South Carolina and they're in a prison somewhere in Boise, like somewhere in Idaho or something like that? How many of you have seen this phenomenon before? Of course, governing through prison is partly to blame for the pipeline in that communities targeted for incarceration tend to be those selected for greater police presence in schools, and as a result, more school-based arrests of youth. Yet there is another dimension to building and sustaining the pipeline. A population of young people entering the labor market and dependent upon the criminal justice industrial complex for employment. So again, this is a cottage industry, right? You got young, often white, mostly white folks, right, leaving school, right, entering the labor market, who will depend on the criminal justice industrial complex for their employment. Think about these rural areas that are mostly white dirt. You know, it ain't nothing really going on in the place. You know, a couple of years ago, I was in Kingston, Rhode Island. Ain't nothing going on in Kingston, Rhode Island. Or nothing much is going on in Kingston, Rhode Island. But having a school like, you know, what's the university in Rhode Island University, right? Or the University of Rhode Island, I can't remember which one it is, right? Having something like that there feeds a lot of its people. So I'm just saying this, I'm just reiterating this for those of you who are not aware of what's going on in the U.S. with where a lot of these prisons are actually located. Who works at the prisons? Who sells their milk to the prison? Who sells their bread or flour or whatever to the prisons? Just know who it is who's making that money and who it is who's filling the prison. Working at middle-class university-age youth have grown up in an era in which their parents have lost jobs and local factories, mines, and plants have closed. Again, where are these places with the local factories, the mines, and the plants that have closed? Think about it. Such youth are increasingly bombarded with images and indicators of bleak job prospects. That is, of course, except for the bright future of one industry, criminal justice. So you see, white society has also found a way to keep its people happy by giving them a fallback industry. If all else fails, there's a fallback industry for you where we round up these Negroes and put them in jail, criminalize them and put them in jail. And you got to understand that's a part of them keeping their nation happy. And you got to understand where you fit in that nation. You have to understand where you fit in that nation. So this brings us to a part of the paper that's labeled Staffing the Pipeline. Although the DOCJT, Department of Criminal Justice Training, is not an EKU program, what's that, East Kentucky University program, it has become in the minds of many Kentuckians inextricably joined. Many of the DOCJT graduates boast they attend EKU. This familiarity with the university breaks the ice for many trainees, encouraging them to begin a part-time college career. A job fair at our college revealed a deeply structured logic of what jobs are appropriate for and available to graduates from the School of Justice Studies. In September 2013, a fair held downstairs from our offices included the following agencies: American Medical Response, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, that's the ATF, and Explosives, Cincinnati Fire Department, Cleveland Police Department, Drug Enforcement Agency, Evansville Police Department, Federal Bureau of Prisons, Florence, Kentucky Police Department, Kentucky Department of Juvenile Justice, Lexington Community Corrections, Lexington Division of Police, Lexington Fire Department, Louisville Metro Police Department, Memphis Police Department, Metro Nashville Police Department, and the United States Marine Corps. Can someone in the chat room post for me what the demographics are in Kentucky? What the race demographics are in Kentucky? I would do it myself, but I don't want to stop from reading the paper. The potential draw of nonprofit, community organizing, advocacy, and legal defense organizations to a job fair for a School of Justice Studies and a College of Justice and Safety. The above list confirms the career orientations of our students. That is, the agencies attending and others like it illuminate the employment opportunities structured into the workforce narrative of our students and demonstrate which jobs are available. So in these kind of rural areas, that's mostly white. I can bet you Kentucky is mostly white. Right? They found a way to make sure that their youth who are entering the job force have a job. Right? They're making sure they have their jobs. So this is a part of the paper considering the staffing of the school to prison pipeline. Right? If you're gonna make sure people have jobs in criminology or the criminal justice system, what do you have to do with criminology and the criminal justice system? If you have a high influx of people coming into that system who are being herded into that system, then what must you do about the system? So again, people, you know, I've been saying this ad nauseum at this point, but the public school system in this country where you're a foreigner, regardless of how much bluster you put on about, you know, you build this shit and all that stuff, this is your country, you know, the powers that be here are showing you just where, you know, what level you're on in the country. You're in the caste that's going to be filling up their prisons and giving them jobs, giving their youth jobs, especially in these small rural towns, these rural states. You are the plug for them. Ain't that so? Based on informal conversations and in-class polling, around 75% of our undergraduate students attend the School of Justice Studies to secure employment in law enforcement and corrections. Why would they do that? Even a conservative estimate of 50% would mean that every year 150 graduates are seeking work in these areas. One of the authors, Schept, is the new coordinator for the School of Justice Studies internship program. The internship provides credit hours for a semester's worth of work. Historically, this has meant interning with a criminal justice agency, a county sheriff's office, the Kentucky State Police, or federal law enforcement agencies such as the U.S. Marshal Service and the Drug Enforcement Agency. Schept, the co-author of this article, and a select group of our School of Justice Studies faculty members are dedicated to broadening the range of internship possibilities and moving the school in the direction of social justice. Right? These guys are looking to broaden the range, right? So they can get more white folks into more different areas of so-called social justice. The reality, however, is that the School of Justice Studies has cultivated institutional relationships with various agencies of criminal justice, and our students wish to take advantage of these connections. The neoliberal university that creates the higher educational context within which the criminal justice department reproduces its history as a training ground for state agents has an important partner in the public school district. As the state withdraws from paying for teachers and counselors, guns and guards emerge as a glaring area of growth. Bryant, in 2013, notes that at a time when most states are cutting education budgets and depressed property taxes are reducing local revenues for schools, lawmakers are having no problem finding cash to spend on guns and guards in schools. According to the Center for Public Integrity, in the aftermath of Sandy Hook, a state legislative delegation in Florida approved a proposal to increase property taxes to pay for more school police. Increase property tax to pay for more school police at an annual cost of up to $130,000 per officer. These guys have a hustle off of your blackness. What has changed? Right? A bill in Mississippi set up a $7.5 million school security fund. Alabama legislators proposed a lottery to pay for a $20 million plan to put police officers in every school. And Indiana lawmakers weighed a measure to set aside $10 million to offer grants to schools to hire local police to post in schools. Now, why would you pay all this money when we, as the authors here asserted earlier on, the schools aren't more safe? Peep the game. The White River Valley School Board, in rural southern Indiana, recently voted to hire an SRO, one of these police officers in the school, for the White River Valley High School from grants provided by the Indiana Department of Homeland Security. The school superintendent has said it's all about providing our kids and our staff a safe and secure environment, but this was established, it's no more safer. The SRO will be armed and have an assortment of duties, as explained by a local journalist. The officer will be expected to provide educational programs, provide a wide variety of professional and technical police work, an investigation including the enforcement of local ordinances, state and federal statutes, provide security with visibility and presence in school buildings, assist in the prevention of crime or delinquency on corporation campuses, acts as an advisor to the administrators for the crisis response teams, and coordinate with the Greene County Sheriff's Department. The officer will be expected to be armed while on campus. Is the word safety in this blurb at all? Is the word safety in this blurb at all? It says assist in the prevention of crime, But that doesn't mean safety per se, right? This trend is not limited to states. Indeed, President Barack Obama has promised 1,000 new SROs as part of a White House plan to reduce gun violence, ignoring the painful irony of placing 1,000 more armed police officers in schools as part of a violence reduction program. That's a good point, right? You put in more guns in the school to quote unquote reduce gun violence. All you're going to do is shift who's carrying out the violence. The logic enacted here presupposes that state violence is a feasible route to pacifying or making civil students. Now, we don't want y'all shooting each other. We prefer our police to shoot you. Good guys with guns, as Wayne LaPierre, executive vice president of the NRA, has called them, are often the ones who enact violence on communities of color and other poor populations. A central enforcing agent of the pipeline is the SRO, a member of law enforcement working directly in the geographies of education. SROs may perform a range of duties, but the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968 describes the position as a career law enforcement officer with sworn duty, employed in community-oriented policing, and assigned by the employing police department or agency to work in collaboration with school and community-based organizations. So a career cop. A Justice Policy Institute report in 2011 revealed a 38% increase in the number of SROs between 1997 and 2007, as more youth become increasingly subjected to juridification of school-based disciplinary problems. As the law enforcement presence in schools heightened, arrests of youth climbed. More police in the schools, of course, more arrests, with more of them being processed in and moving through various courts, adult and juvenile detention systems. Did the folks in the chat room come through with the numbers? No. I'll look it up in a second. SROs perform duties other than arresting students on school grounds. According to the National Institute of Justice report, SROs reported that their work week was evenly split between law enforcement duties and advising, mentoring, and teaching. However, would or should a student concerned about drugs, peer pressure, parental issues, family income, sex, or violence seek out a police officer for support? In our community, no. Furthermore, what does it signify to students that the school, and presumably the state, believes that police officers are the most appropriate actors to deal with situations that are not, on their face, issues of police power? Right? And again, we talk about building curriculum, right? And the thing that we have to keep in mind is that when building curriculum, we want to create these safe spaces for our people. We don't want to make folks believe that safety, comes from police. And that's something that we've kind of bought into. So, for example, you have a situation where a mother with a grown son who's suffering from something like bipolar or some type of manic depressive state or whatever, is having an episode. And she'll call the police for the police to come and bring some kind of help, right? And what do the police do when they get there? They shoot the guy who's going through this manic state. They shoot him down dead. If we had the proper understanding of who and what the police represent, right, we wouldn't call the police for matters like that. What we want to create in our nations is having the right people for the job. We want to be able to reach out to our people who will have compassion for his or her people, right? Who will come to problem solve, bearing in mind that this is one of your people who has a problem and I need to help them with their problem. Again, this is the importance of curriculum. What's the curriculum that a police officer gets in the academy? The curriculum that they get is that every black person is a perp, not to be trusted, to be doubly policed at all times. You know, I was recently stopped by police again. Me. You see? But they're taught to see me as a problem. I'm walking with a book in my hand, literally a book in my hand, and I get stopped. Curriculum is the key. Education is the key. When we are able to teach our people how to, if you have to engage with these people, we're supposed to know exactly how to engage with them. If we don't want to engage with them, then we need to learn how to solve problems that we can market ourselves, quote unquote, market ourselves to our people elsewhere on the planet. For example, the continent, and just get up out of here. Finally, how is a young person supposed to know what he or she can or cannot say to someone who may be at once a mentor and a cop? Important question. There is substantial room for coercion, secrecy, shame, and deployment of state punishment in an area where students should have freedom to work through their issues without the threat of sanction. The concept of pacification is a potentially useful way to think about SROs. Often associated with U.S. counterinsurgency efforts in Vietnam, recent calls have been issued for radical theory to reappropriate the concept from its colonialist imperial trappings. As a doctrine of capitalist state power, pacification includes a combination of outright coercion and violence, and softer power that aims for consent. Quote, winning hearts and minds. Pacification is conceived as a project of securing the capitalist social order and its peculiar social relations, wage labor, private property, and accumulation. As such, it offers a useful way of thinking through the iron fist and velvet glove aspects of police power, as well as the ways that police power has long aimed to fabricate a particular social order around a particular regime of accumulation. As Herbert in 1997 shows in his ethnography of the LAPD, pacifying a particular space is a central mandate of patrol officers, and they deploy various techniques to accomplish this goal. SROs thus serve as agents of pacification. They pacify the space of the school and its population of students by getting to know them, becoming their friend or mentor, and providing a role model while resorting to more direct means of discipline and arrest when softer forms of security are ineffective. A strength of pacification as a critical concept is its implication that populations are not passive and often resist pacification efforts. Do you guys believe that? Do you believe that a strength of pacification as a critical concept is its implication that populations are not passive and often resist pacification efforts? In terms of enforcing particular social relations and political economies, the SRO is a mediating agent between surplus populations and the larger political economies of neoliberal education, policing, and prisons. Departments of criminology and criminal justice staff the pipeline by producing state law enforcement agents such as SROs whose business is pacification. By quote-unquote educating civilians in the episteme that is criminal justice and then transforming their bodies into marketable security commodities, criminology and criminal justice departments produce agents or commodities of pacification. They in turn increasingly find themselves assigned to jobs that involve policing the hallways of public education. Since pacification presupposes resistance and contestation, these projects must be justified and legitimated as the most democratic way to secure the insecurities of capitalist late modernity. Departments of criminology and criminal justice exist to provide such justification. So this brings us to a section of the paper called Legitimating the Pipeline. But before we go on, I want to look up the question I had earlier. So, Kentucky's population demographics are as such. Yeah, so Kentucky is 87% white, right? 7%, or let's say 8% black, right? Two or more races make up 2.25% of, so that's like your Latinos and whatever. And the Asian population is about 1.41% of Kentucky. So Kentucky is overwhelmingly white. Even if you want to add the Asian to the white numbers, right, it is just overwhelmingly white. Right, let me just double check that. Yeah, 87% white, 8% black or African American. Two or more races make up 2.25%. Asians are 1.41%. Other race, I don't know what other race is 0.99%. Native Americans are 0.22%. Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders are 0.06%. So the majority race in Kentucky is white and black, with whites being 87%. So again, I ask you, who are these people who are coming into the labor force who are being herded into law enforcement? And who do you think they practice on? Before I go any further with the paper, let me pause here for station ID.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
And we're back. We're at a part of the paper called Legitimating the Pipeline. In today's paper, we're revisiting the school-to-prison pipeline through our reading of this particular paper. So, legitimating the pipeline. The history of our discipline reveals an intimate, interdependent relationship with the state, and today, in quotidian ways, criminal justice students are prepared for careers in a law enforcement apparatus that maintain and enforce the pipeline. Moreover, the discipline is complicit in the production of... The discipline is complicit in the production of knowledge and the epistemological legitimacy we give to the school-to-prison pipeline. In this realm, there is the greatest space for resistance. We cannot reverse the discipline's historical legacy or easily change the course of the larger institutional context of a department or school. More room to maneuver exists to intervene in the knowledge, production, practices, and orientation that legitimate the practice and our role in it. Just give me 1 second. All right, just had to fix something that fell down there. So this brings us to a section called the Criminological Complicity in the School-to-Prison Pipeline. Our college houses the Kentucky Center for School Safety, or the Center, which conducts research into and training on, among other things, SROs. The presence of this center in our college clarifies the relationship we are attempting to examine. For it is a gateway between school jurisdiction and the federal funds that support those jurisdictions in the area of school safety. As budgets shrink, the availability of millions of dollars in funding for schools becomes increasingly attractive. The center's location at a respected college, staffed by researchers, legitimates its existence and gives its products credibility. A university setting establishes the center as a location of specialized scholarship, which can translate research into policy and analysis and implementation. Thus, scholars researching the ongoing existence of phenomena such as the pipeline should seriously examine statements and positions such as the one on SROs found on the center's webpage, which states, maintaining safe schools requires the involvement of many agencies outside of the educational community, particularly law enforcement, social service, juvenile justice agencies, and the court system. Do you guys think this will be a problem in an African centered school with with African centered teachers, administration, etc.? Do you think this would be a problem? Partnerships across these agencies improve school safety and serve the needs of youth at risk. For example, law enforcement agencies assist schools in development of agency and emergency plans, provide classroom instructions with programs such as DARE, D-A-R-E, and crime prevention, investigate crimes in schools and often assign officers to schools through an adopt a school or school resource officer program. When we talked about the paper a couple months back, about the profile of an Afrocentric teacher. If you remember in that paper, right, the profile of the brother, I think his name was Toure, that we were looking at, he dealt with a situation where, you know, there could have been some retaliation against the kid in the school. He drove this kid to and from school for some weeks, talked to the kid, he counseled him on what's going on, you know. And there, you know, at the time of the writing of the paper, which was sometime later, there had been no retaliation attack on the kid. So to answer my own question, I think if we have teachers, and this includes you as parents, who are African-centered, who are dedicated to the children that we are supposed to serve, you won't have all this drama where you need to have law enforcement and social services and the court system and all that involved in your school. The academic literature generally concludes that SROs in schools do not enhance student safety, and yet the center promotes expanding their use. Right? All a part of the game. It's a grift. And you are the sucker on the end of it being abused. This SRO webpage even features a quotation from the U.S. Department of Justice, the DOJ, quote, "Communities throughout the nation recognize that trained, sworn law enforcement officers assigned to schools make a difference," end quote. Research in the pipeline shows that SROs do make a difference, but not in the ways the quoted statement misleadingly applies. Beyond defining, advocating for, and noting that numbers of SROs in the state, approximately 230 in more than half of Kentucky's counties, the webpage displays a student-made poster for a reading week that features a sheriff's car and caution tape, proudly noting that SROs are so much a part of the school that some things they are used in academic, I think it's sometimes, they are used in academic campaigns, such as the Read poster. Such narratives operate on multiple planes. Concretely, they promote the belief that the police, courts, and juvenile justice systems are essential to keeping schools safe. Right? But don't they know this? I mean, honestly, we're reading this paper, but don't they know this? Right? They know it's not safe. Even these authors are telling you these entities don't make schools any more safe. So now, you knowing this, what are you going to do about it? Ask them to do better? Ask them to do better? Or are you going to do better on your own? And by doing better, I mean putting your money where your mouth is, putting your money where your children are, where your heart is, and building schools exclusively for your people, free of the police, courts, and juvenile justice systems. Indeed, safety requires their active involvement. Indeed, safety requires their active involvement. Two programs they endorse, SROs and the infamous drug abuse, and the infamous drug abuse resistance education, which is the DARE, D-A-R-E, program, have been roundly dismissed by empirical studies as ineffective. Thus, the center's expertise subjugates empirical and evidence-based knowledge to an ideological agenda of securitization. Ultimately, it argues that cops, courts, and corrections are indispensable to safety, but never defines what makes a school safe. You know, all this is a part of the deception in this war. Disregarding data proving otherwise, criminology and the state advance armed actors as solutions to problems that are deeply structured by the neoliberal withdrawal of the welfare state and the resulting problems of classroom size, poverty, under-resourced schools, and disaffected students. Youth point out that police in schools may protect the school, but not the students. Who then is being served and protected by SROs and other technologies of the pipeline? What interests are being secured by the assemblage of schools, police, prison? Couple of good questions here. Right? We understand and we talk about the school to prison pipeline, right? We understand the game that's being played where they claim that you need to have these different agencies or industries in the school, you know, mixed in with the school some way, somehow, right? But then we also know from the data, right, that these entities are not bringing any more safety to the school, right, by having their presence in the school. So then, what are these entities really there for? Let's see how honest these authors will answer the question. The Center's endorsement of the DOJ position on SROs is instructive as a meta-narrative of criminology. The discourse and the center as a place and space of ideological perpetuation make them indispensable to the project of school safety. The work of juridifying, policing, and carceralizing the school and of subjecting students to increasing numbers of hearings, arrests, and detentions requires constant justification, or at least the appearance of it. The absence of evidence or expertise that a district can use to justify the activity, how could parents accept such gross encroachment into educational space? And this was the question Sister Renee asked, right, in the chat room. In this way, criminology, due to centers like this, DOJ grants and departments in need of students, becomes essential to the operation. So this is how it's pushed on. So this is why it's pushed, right? Because it's essential to the operation. But like I believe, and like I said earlier, parents will accept it because the lie is told that you're making things safer for students. Some compelling work within criminology and substantial work outside of it does critique the carceral state and the pipeline. Yet in this literature and anecdotally from our professional lives, the discipline's critical variant often remains decidedly reformist and thus does not and cannot offer a more radical critique of the state and capital needed for material disruption. Rarely are the political and cultural assumptions constituting the foundations of the discipline thoroughly scrutinized. Under the pretense of being radical, those in the critical subfields of criminology and criminal justice, along with reformist criminal justice system administrators, often speak the language of progressivism, modernization, reform, and a fetish for the rule of law as a solution to modern ills. In everyday practice, professors of criminal justice say we need to reach those students who are going to be officers and teach them how to be better. For example, professional, empathic, civilized, etc. We are making a difference, even if it's in minimal ways. And you know my feeling about making small differences. Police professionals and administrators proclaim similar things. I want my officers to have high academic qualifications, the best training, and work with the community in helpful, smart, and empathic ways. This approach has some utility, but generally its pervasive, insidious ideological framing precludes serious consideration of questions regarding state power and violence, political economy, and the genealogy of racism and classism that underpins the liberal project of the penal state. Meaners, in 2011, has examined the role of youth in the prison industrial complex. In her view, children have been and remain the lifeblood of prison expansion due to racialized constructs of innocence and safety. Was this person paid to come up with this statement or to come up with this viewpoint? Like, damn. By extension, we submit that the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice is a central location where the false promises of safety and employment, particularly for our most innocent children, are repeatedly used to expand the prison nation. Right? So that goes back to my answer to Sister Renee. Right? These false promises of safety is why parents accept it. And on the flip side, they're claiming that, you know, the play in Kentucky, where it's mostly white, they're getting into this for employment. Meaners also argues that approaches to the pipeline problem often rest on recognition rather than redistribution. Departments, individual scholars, and even students angling for careers in law enforcement recognize the problem and within proscribed and decidedly liberal frameworks see solutions in working as good cops or social services workers to improve or help. In the name of reform and benevolence, concerned and even leftist criminologists reinscribe the common sense of criminal justice, now further instantiated through liberal logics and discourses that purport to offer alternative approaches to punitive business as usual. Shout out to you guys who are listening to the show live. I hope the paper is a little bit revealing, although it might be threading over some ideas that we kind of realized on our own or as a collective in the last couple of years. I do hope that the paper highlights, you know, some of the issues, even in our own thinking, towards the prison industrial complex. This highlights the fluidity with which the neoliberal state structures the political economic reality of labor markets and higher education, while configuring the terrain of discourse on which criminal justice academics operate. In our rueful, guilt-ridden teaching of students wishing to fashion better SROs, police probation, or corrections officers, the state's logic of security flows in and through us. We seek imagined social security for certain youth, job security for our students, school security for teachers and students, public security for imagined communities, and even state and homeland security, since secure hometowns make secure homelands, in the Department of Homeland Security's neocolonial logic. This fetishistic logic of security must be refused, as it primarily enhances accumulation and state power against alternative forms of human solidarity. Against this pervasive logic, we reject such reformist changes and demand that criminology take seriously an abolitionist and anti-security project of redistribution. Such an approach requires that scholarship move beyond recognition of the problem. Instead, scholarship must respond to and generate alternatives to the school-to-prison pipeline that result in transformative changes within and outside the school that challenges system of power, oppression, and privilege. This calls for two complementary actions. One, the removal rather than the reformation of the material support that the state provides to the pipeline, and two, its subsequent redistribution in communities targeted by policing and incarceration. I'll add three, take your black kids out of these people's schools. Thus, removing material support for the school-to-prison pipeline, the SROs, the justifying discourses, and the financial investment in other forms of securitization must be accompanied by a process of currency exchange, whereby the money previously assigned to the pipeline is relocated to assist and empower communities rather than police and imprison them. And that's the thing about money. You'll hear people say, well, follow the money. And a lot of times they don't expand upon, well, why are you following the money? People spend money on the things that they care about. People spend money and people acquire money to spend it on the things that they care about. If you're black, Pan-African, you want to acquire money so that you could spend it on that thing that you care about. Pan-Africanism, black people, global, right? If you're a musician, you're going to spend your money on not necessarily just on musical instruments, but on recording gear, studio time. Like you acquire your money for, and you spend it on what you care for. This is why you follow the money. The folks that they're talking about here, they're spending their money on what they care about. They care about criminalizing people. And the people is us. Again, considering you're as black as I am. When I say us. This brings us to the conclusion of the paper. Before I read the conclusion of the paper, I want to remind you guys of the KWAZ radio podcast network.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Okay. Speaking of KWAZ Radio, make sure you guys go and subscribe to the other folks on the podcast network. Like and subscribe, as well as share. Click the bell icon so that you can be updated or notified when they're online themselves. Same thing for me. Right now, I'm at 420 subs. I'd like to see the platform reach 500 by year's end. I know that's only like 2 weeks away, but if you haven't already subscribed to the platform, please do so. If you haven't shared this with your friends, family, etc., and ask them to subscribe, please do so. I'd like to see that subscription number get halfway to where I'd like it to be by the end of 2021, right? You guys who have been tuning in and sitting through the episodes live, you have done me a great service. I appreciate you all. The watch hours have been looking kind of good, but if the subscription numbers are less than 1,000, you know, it still becomes a problem for me to push the channel any further. Anyway, we are at the conclusion of the paper. Let's see what they conclude. Millions of young people experience the school-to-prison pipeline. Compelling scholarship, journalism, and activism have illuminated its radicalized and class nature, trace its origins, and demand that it be dismantled. Our contribution to this vibrant collection of work seeks to better formulate the complicity of academic criminology and criminal justice in its construction, operations, and justification. Understanding the problem of the pipeline and working towards its abolition require an appreciation of the extent to which the discipline provides it with material funding, physical bodies, and intellectual legitimacy. We specifically address the reformist and apologist tendencies within criminology and criminal justice. These well-intentioned efforts simply produce slightly more compassionate or informed SROs and enable ongoing juridification, policing, and incarceration of a racialized and classed youth. We urge colleagues in our field to commit to abolition of the pipeline and of the structural conditions that make it possible. And these are some notes here. I'm not going to bother to read the notes, but you know, this was a very kind of down the middle, kind of, you know, very bland, very white type paper, because it doesn't really, I mean, it mentions the racialized implications of what's being done here, but it doesn't talk as much about it as I would care for it to talk about. What this paper is basically saying, and I go back to the original note, the original quotation of the paper, right? That does have some truth to it, right? If you apply it to other things, right? But this quote, a man working in a munitions factory, explains that he is not killing, he's just trying to get out a product, right? A lot of police look at it that way as well. The problem with that is, though, a man working in a munitions factory isn't trained in killing. His objective, he's not trained to necessarily hate a certain group of people who are going to be the benefactors of these munitions. He's not trained to hate these people. So in a sense, he is actually just doing a job, although, let's be real about it, he's supposed to know that if you're making a bomb or components for a bomb, right, you're participating in the killing of people. Right, so to push this argument that, in this case, on cases like these, right, that, there are consequences, yes, but that the consequences can you guys hear me? Something strange on the screen. Okay, it looks like you guys should be able to hear me. But to push this idea that, you know, I'm just doing my job here and I'm not a part of the larger problem, it's just nonsense. If I'm building bomb pots in the military, I know those bomb pots are gonna go and kill some people in a cave somewhere. Most likely some brown or black folks. Right? So this idea that, yeah, there's consequences, but because the process is so fragmented, you might not see the consequence in respects like these, like war, like the war of education, the war that's going on in the school system, is just absolutely ridiculous. So for some reason, I'm now seeing comments that I did not see on my phone monitor. So let me go back through and check some stuff. The pro-black perspective says, yeah, everyone eating off the prisons, exactly. Whites love that, yep. Jacadero, that's why peace to you, brother. I didn't even know you were here. Like when I'm looking at the stuff on my phone, I'm not seeing these comments at all. My uncle's from Minnesota, was sent to Illinois prison, then transferred to a West Virginia prison. Yeah, think about those places that you're talking about, right? Think about West Virginia. Minnesota, right? Think about who lives in those, who predominantly lives in those places. And the pro-black perspective did in fact put in the stats, but again, I didn't see it at the time, so I kind of looked it up and read it off without realizing he had put it in there. I appreciate you guys for being here in the chat room. I don't know why I'm not seeing your comments on the phone, but I am seeing it on the browser and Chrome. That's weird. But yeah, so this idea that, a person is just a piece in the cog of the wheel and doesn't understand that that there's a wheel is just utterly ridiculous. But again, the good thing in reading this stuff is you get to understand and get to see just how dumb these folks are you're going up against. Either they're dumb or they're playing dumb really well, right? But I do believe there's a component of these folks who just don't know better. And I'm not excusing them at all. Please don't take it at that. But they're just silly. They're just in their own little bubble and they're not looking at everything else. But we as black folks, we don't get that. We don't get that ability. If we are grinding the registration number off of a gun and handing it off to a homie in the streets, we know what we're a part of. We know exactly what we're a part of. But these guys are either playing dumb or they're actually that dumb to think that, well, I'm in law enforcement, I arrest more, the higher-ups have me arresting more black youth for nonsense that we don't ever touch white youth for, but somehow I don't know I'm a part of this school-to-prison pipeline. The bottom line with this paper and most other papers that that we've read here, or that you've heard me read is that we can't rely on these folks at all. We only could rely on ourselves. And that's why I push the idea of you got to get involved. And hey, if you don't want to do it with me, that's fine. Do it with someone. Change the curriculum for you. If you don't want to do it for your children, do it for someone else's children. You know, but just do it. This is what we send our kids to. And like I said earlier, some of this stuff I know for a fact is what kids are going through. You got to walk into a school and walk through a metal detector. I went to go to a school to do some business in a school. I had to take off my belt, take everything out of my pockets. Like I thought I was taking a trip somewhere. I was just going to the 5th floor to talk to a principal. You know, what do you think that does when your school day is run like the average day in lockup? When you literally see overseers in the school. Yeah, so again, this paper is a part of the series of discussing, African-centered curriculum. Kind of, in a sense, this paper kind of shows you how much of a need there is. It shows you how we got to get out of the prison industrial complex. Because again, our people don't even eat off of that. Again, like I told you guys a couple weeks or months ago, I went to visit someone upstate New York here who was in prison. And it's in one of these little towns that ain't no black people in that town. Right? So you're literally a slave to these people, as you already know. It's time to get out of this. It's time to educate our youth to be better, to avoid the pitfalls, right? And it's time for us to do the work that dissuades them from getting into the pitfalls. One of the big things, I remember Onita saying this to me on Twitter one time ago, is it's about the local resources and them having jobs and this, that, and the other. Look, some of these kids have jobs and still do dumb shit. There's something we got to go a little bit deeper. Life is not a game. Being criminal and robbing and killing people and all this, that is not a game. And we got to start to be very honest about our people, with ourselves, about our people. Like, we've got folks out here, we got kids who think it's a game to go and take someone's life. That's regardless of resources. We got to teach different. If there's any other questions from the chat room, for those of you who are live with me, hit me a question if you wish. I'll hang around to see if there's any more questions. If not, I will end it here. But in the meantime, while I await that, again, I want to say to you guys, I appreciate you. Thank you for hopping on tonight, keeping me company, I guess, while I read this paper. The paper, again, the authors will, I'm not sure if they don't know or if they are pretending not to know, but either way, we know, right? We are aware now of, and have been aware of this complex, this industrial complex. We got to do the things now to get our people, our children especially, out of it. Again, if you talk to most incarcerated people, if you look at the histories of most of our black incarcerated people, they're there, and their path there started like in grade 3. How many of you know people who you went to school with in grade 3, for example, or grade 6 or grade 9, who are in prison today? I can raise my hand several times, right? Several times. I can raise my hand another several times to those of us, those of my people who are in the streets heavily, who died in the streets, who killed people in the streets, who made a name for themselves in the street. And it started from like grade 3, if I'm honest. So anyway, it doesn't seem like I have any more questions, comments in the chat room. I appreciate you guys again. Make sure to tune in to the Pro-Black Perspective tomorrow evening at 8, I believe. Until next time, guys, peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.